And you had that for the Torvarath as well, people that would mend armor and stuff.
Every major caste had its own worker subsection. They took care of the menial tasks. Akivans, the higher tiered ones, focused purely on their role in society, magic, lore, or religion.
It's also interesting to note that the Akivans originally, and they've definitely shifted in EverQuest 2, but in EQ1, there was really only one female model Akivan, and well, two really, the Aten and Aken Hara.
Aten and Raquel.
Yeah, Akel. And that was this because they were made in Luclin's image.
They
All
are
the
very
others,
genderless.
yes, all the others were androgynous, very genderless, and you can again see that in some of these pictures. These right here. This is what they were meant to look like. This was what the majority of Akivans looked like, and that has definitely shifted in EverQuest 2. We don't necessarily have a reason for it yet, but I've got a picture of that coming up in just a second.
They are far more gendered in some of the female models that were newly introduced with the events. There are female models in EverQuest 2 that sport nose piercings, which I thought was pretty cool.
We have a little implication as to why it might have come this way. We know that after the civil war between Akel and Aten, the society had already begun to change some, with radicalization in small doses, the learning of the common tongue, understanding of the outside races. But with more recent history, I'm not going to go into detail because into the upcoming expansion, but we know that Luclin herself has been reachable by her children for several centuries now. Their connection with her being missing, their own pride and identity has started, and with the Shipsar now imposing a force of control over the majority of Akivans, things that would have previously been completely unimaginable to them, they now have no choice to for their lives. You can actually now find Akivans that speak common tongue fluently, find their castes mixing and marching on orders from on high. All of this points towards a breakdown and the loss of that stubbornness that they used to be so very enamored of, which is tragic if you think about it.
So that was one of the reasons, too, I mentioned earlier that Luclin is the place of civil wars. The civil war in between the Akivans, which is what creates Maiden in EverQuest 1, that happened because there was the civil war was about basically allowing mortal corruption and mortal perversion and things like that into the Akivan society. So, for instance, one side heavily objected to using any tongue other than the fleshless tongue, which was the tongue given to them by Luclin herself. And I also mentioned that Akivans are different from other races. That's because they were actually, when they still had the connection to their goddess, they were immortal, functionally immortal. When they died in their physical bodies, they would come back in spirit form. Here's some of the concept art of it right now. And then if I go back over here, yes, you can see them here as well. And they would come back in this shadowed form, and they would stay in that shadowed form until another body became available for them. And you can see even in EverQuest 1 later on, when Luclin actually came into the world, we actually get her much, much later. She does the same thing, and I will pull up that screenshot in just a second here when I find it in all the conversations we have. But yeah, the spirit form is called their Zakra, and here we
Sorry,
go.
it's actually chakra. The X in Akivan has an SH sound.
Mm-hmm. Chakra.
Well, I'm just going to pronounce everything wrong, just so you know. So feel free to correct me all the time.
All right.
Okay, here's...
Okay. Their language is kind of fiddly, in my opinion. I'm still learning it, so...
Here's Luclin in EverQuest 1, and here is her shadow. And when we go back even further, it's interesting because this is her original EverQuest model. Her original EverQuest art that they did, rather, not her model. But this is what she was originally supposed to look like. And you can see even her appearance here was a little more androgynous. Not what she became in EverQuest later on, where she became definitely sexualized.
Yeah. Also, as far as the piercing and the gendered appearances for the Akiva, I do have a few screenshots, and I'm just going to share one of them if that is alright.
Please do. And I've got just a bunch of different pictures of Luclin again from EverQuest that I'm sharing right now. And again, this is the art of their shadow form. And one of the things that happened that we mentioned is that in Norrath, in EverQuest, the transition from EverQuest to EverQuest 2,
There's
basically...
some earrings, which I thought was pretty interesting.
So, let's see if I can get those pictures. Can you send those in Discord so I can pull them up?
What, you mean the screenshots I took?
Yes.
Sure. Do you want me to send them in this one, or...?
That's fine. So while we're waiting on that, the big difference in EverQuest 1, mortals got too big for their britches, and we invaded the gods' planes, and they really didn't like, because their position was threatened, and we invaded all the elemental planes, all the planes of influence, and then we went into the plane of time, and eventually Drizzle Rowe did her share in impersonation, and she turned back time to kind of undo it. And the gods got together because they were pissed, and what they do is they pull away their influence from Norrath. They decide to make this pact and pull away, and that's what causes part of the shattering and the rending and all of the trauma that Norrath has endured when you get to EQ2. Luclin did this as well. She went silent and pulled back from her children, and the Akivans had always had Luclin in their presence. She was always around for them, and when that happened, they were kind of left. I mean, it's as you can imagine if you had a deity that you worshipped that you could directly communicate with, and all of a sudden there's radio silence, and that's been your entire society, that's been your entire life. You have a very rigid class structure, you have a very rigid society, and that's gone, and now what do you do?
It even goes a little beyond that. Luclin is actually the biological or genetic mother of the Akivan race. Most Norrathian species are mortal because they've been created, but Akivans, alongside dragons, are the only known half-god species. Dragons were born directly from the eggs of Vishon and are actual kin to her, and Akivans were actually born from Luclin's own blood after she had completed her creation and the 1,000 years of interplanar war that had almost destroyed her concepts. So she was literally a mother to this species, to their society, to their individuals. They have had a familial bond that suddenly just vanished around them.
Exactly, Sears. You could call her on the phone anytime you wanted, and then all of a sudden she's not answering the phone. And you have, if you're the Akivans, you might have some kind of understanding of what's been going on Norrath and what's going on there, but they didn't really interfere or deal with the affairs of the mortal races. They were very much content to be on Luclin, to live on Luclin, and keep up with everything that was going on there. So all of a sudden, Mom is gone. You don't know why. You don't know what's going on. And then not that long after, your world is destroyed by the invading armies of other gods. And one of the things that I don't think that we know, and you guys who have done beta can correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know exactly what happened to them or to their land.
We know that the city of Rexdal survived. We know that the Achevan ruins, better known as the original capital of the Kavithan, actually fell in a state of disrepair that is now little more than shards of land in a sea. But those Achevans who have remained loyal to Luclin or distant from the now Shisar conquered Vexthal have actually returned to the ruins of Kavithan and have made it their home once again.
Yes, and you find a lot of humans on those little islands still there. Chakras, very aggro. Yep. I have also included in the screenshot dump a picture of an Achevan shadow. I had to screenshot that fast during that fight of some of the AOM bosses.
Alright, give me just a second and I will pull that up as well.
Additionally, with Altar of Malice in particular, we had a bunch of new vocabulary and positions for the Achevans that we do not currently have a translation for that I know of.
We know that the devs somewhere have an Achevan dictionary of their own, some sort of Bible for it, and they have been dutifully expanding it. And I definitely hope at some point in the future here we get the chance to get a little more of it.
As well.
Wasn't it the Luclin monster manual that the translations are in? I'm trying to retrieve because I have my books right here.
It has portions of the language, but if I recall, only a fairly minute fraction comparatively. Some of the words we couldn't find without literally looting items and seeing their casting identify on them.
And the monster manual came out much later than the actual expansion did.
Very true.
And more hints towards the Shisar conquering or integrating or whatever you want to call it at this point with the Achevans were alluded to in some of the Altar of Malice instances. For people like me who don't run raids or heroic instances right off the bat, some of this content is kind of something you won't know unless you hear it from someone else. So one of the mobs in one of the AOM zones that's Achevan in one of the Shisar themed zones says, "In service of the taskmasters, your lives shall be delivered." And when you slay Achevan mobs in the Castle Highhold, they will sometimes, some of the names will say something upon death to the effect of, "They will come."
Shisars have always used taskmasters as their primary force for driving control over what they consider lesser or other races. A lot of the more famous ones tended to be their rulers over the Ixar slaves that they brought with them. So it is not unsurprising that the Shisar would employ taskmasters again to try to organize what they've captured from Achevan society. Shisar taskmasters are notoriously vicious.
In the same instance of the mob I screenshotted and just spoke of, who mentions the service of the taskmasters, I may be mistaken, but I believe there was an actual taskmaster mob in there, so what you say seems to be confirmed.
So, utilizing one of the pictures that we have right now, I have Pov Zinkas on screen, and according to the dictionary that I have right here, Zen is war, and Kas is black, so black war, and then Sinshali is
The rogues cast.
Yep, the assassins, spies. There was another weird vocabulary position term that I have not seen a translation for, and that was the Tellerus Zen Yen. It's the Yen part that I have not seen a translation for, but I could be mistaken. Tellerus are the mercenaries, and the Zen means war, but I do not know what that Yen part means. Yes, that's the one.
Yes, and there's no translation that we have in the book yet. But again, we always only had the tiniest portion of their language.
So
Now this
shall we? Sorry, go ahead.
this actually does play interestingly into the lore of the fleshless tongue. The language itself is said to have been a divine substance created by Luclin, and in theory, no non-Akevan can actually learn the fleshless tongue on their own. Now, there have been instances where one Akevan could grant an outsider the ability to speak it or a temporary understanding, but stories and hearsay suggest that anyone actually attempting to learn the whole language could end up going mad from it.
Mm-hmm.
So that could actually be in a bit of a fourth wall break here, not allowing us to learn the whole language because they don't want their players going mad.
Yeah, it's definitely driven me. Taking a few extra minutes of me trying to figure out what's going on in the way of syntax and stuff, but I'm getting there.
So we have a couple more questions. Cirrus asks, didn't the Dressalisk break Luclin? I read that somewhere.
You will see things about the Dressalisk again in the new expansion. I don't really remember the specifics, and I don't want to spoil it.
What we know going into it, without going into the story that's revealed in the expansion, is that the Dressalisk was part of the invasion of the Nexus. It was reportedly seen in the hands of Diaku soldiers. Now, those are the elite Ralosians from within the Plane of War, residents of the Fortress of Drunder. They invaded Luclin with the Dressalisk in tow. Now, that's the point at which we lost all contact and knowledge of Luclin. So, what happened with it, what they did with it, that remains to be discovered.
Another question would be totally unrelated, but do Luclin and Drenal have any interconnection in terms of deific terms? Now, to my knowledge, they don't, but somebody else might have different knowledge.
They actually are not related. Drinal was actually not a god until only recently. Drinal is one of the eldest of the true spirits. Spirits, while having some deity-like qualities, are purely mortal physical entities that exist on the physical world. The Everything in Norrath has a spirit. The grass, the rocks, the people who die become spirits before they pass on. But some of the oldest and most innate parts of the world were spirits naturally. Drinal was the guardian spirit of death and the passage beyond. Only after absorbing the divine essence of two slain gods did Drinal's power begin to grow to the point where he began controlling the Aetherneer as if it was a planar realm. Before that, the Aetherneer's shape was actually determined by the conscious will of the souls passing through it. It was an amorphous place, a very ephemeral, dreamlike place that's determined by your perception. Now that Drinal has become a god, the changes to the afterlife can only be guessed at.
Cirrus says that he was a demi-power, and that was kind of my understanding as well, Cirrus. And we had this conversation before we went live. But one of the things that I mentioned is that it's important to remember that none of us were the developers who wrote the lore, so we can't say there's a definitive answer. And EverQuest 2 has always been, it's always had gray space. It's always had conflicting answers on the lore, so that multiple stories are telling the same thing at different times, which is what you can see in how Drizzle Rowe, we used to think that she was the definitive goddess of magic, but she was not the first goddess of magic, or Anashti Sul. You see it in multiple situations. But yeah, I always thought of him as a demi-power. If you go back to the original EverQuest information, he's listed under deities. He's very clearly listed as a deity, so that was always my understanding as well.
Yeah.
But the newer lore speaks of him as the true spirit, which is everything that Gannor was talking about. You see that kind of information and clarification in EverQuest 2.
And,
I will see if I can pull out my player's manual and see if it has anything as well.
Well, it is also worth noting that the Elder True Spirits, the oldest and most powerful of them, do have a divine-like standing in the mortal worlds, and there have been cases where other True Spirits have been worshipped by groups, cults, or small societies, especially those of a more tribal nature. Shamanism has always been a powerful religious force in Norrath, and the Elder True Spirits are the very tip of the pyramid of shamanism without jumping directly into the gods of influence themselves. So there is a lot of gray area there, and it really depends on how those observing it want to consider it. If they want to isolate him in a category, or if they want to see him as a divine or greater being worthy of following and learning from.
now, again, are we talking about the Lucian and the Hikahinja?
Drinel specifically, the Silver Reaper.
Okay. Because see, in EQA we called them spirit gods. We just didn't call them straight up gods. We had the Unkept Warders worshipping different one. We had the Silver Reaper. Can't remember the different. There was different factions. There was the Wards of the Dawn. There was another one. There were the Lycan factions that worshipped him.
There's actually. Oh, go ahead, Ron.
I'm sorry, I keep doing that. I was gonna mention real quick about Luclin, not to like be an annoyance, but you were talking about the shadow sickness earlier, and I believe that is what has happened to those. When you first get to the Tranquil Sea, you see all those shadow warped Farsees, twisted Farsees crew members, and I think that is what is going on with them.
Yep. From what we are told in the questline there, it does match with the description of shadow sickness.
Additionally, the Threshfin sharks, like Bladefin and the sharks you see on that island, there are also Threshfin sharks, like elder ancient Threshfin sharks on Luclin, which I thought was pretty interesting, and that's about as much spoily as I'm gonna get.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit, well, we've talked a lot about the Akivans, we've talked about the Combine Empire, which you also see in EQ2, when we combined efforts again to defeat Carathim. That was the resurrection of the Combine Empire on Norrath. But we haven't really talked about Gannor's favorite people except tangentially, the Shisar. I think the Shisar are particularly interesting because their impact on Norrath throughout history, throughout the recorded history that we know about, has been pretty major, even if we didn't see them directly. We have seen their ruins, we've had information about them, and most importantly, if you've played and done the various different quests, you may be a little bit familiar with the idea of the Shisar calendar. This picture right here comes from the EverQuest 10-year anniversary book, but you can see it in game. We've seen it a couple times in different ways.
Ah, that's the image I was talking about.
Yep, I got it.
Number 3, if you notice, is our Shisar calendar, which is only, when you start understanding, that's like just part of the history at this point.
If I give me a second, I should be able to pull up a little bit more of that. But yeah, this comes directly from the devs themselves when they were designing the game, and specifically designing Kunark and EQ2. I don't know how clear the text is, so I'll read it a little bit. On the most basic level, the Shisar calendar is divided into 4 panels, sections, or quads. The archetypal stones shapes seen here are similar to the ones seen all over Norrath. Some ask if they represented rebirth to the Shisar, the ancient egg-born serpent race, or did these shapes mimic primordial continents on Norrath, or were they totems of some kind? The Chalcith stone, which we've seen a lot of, fits into one of the 4 quadrants already. 7 iconic symbols can still be seen on it. Each of the 4 basic sections have 2 runes of a more cunning design than those on the Chalcith stone. From each of these 8 runes spring forth 16 serpent heads with unique Shisar signs on them.
As has been mentioned previously, we know that Sraesha has been gifted with a powerful capacity to see the future. We've seen this played out in events both depicted on the stone and recorded history. When the Shisar had angered the gods such that their own creator was prepared to unleash the green mist to wipe them out, Sraesha is the one who saw this coming and was able to devise the plan to abandon Norrath and escape the green mist. We also have 2 other major instances of Sraesha being a step ahead of major cultural tragedy by being able to perceive its coming before it happens. There was a rebellion among the Shisar shortly after their escape to Luclin. One of the greatest lords of the Shisar, Vizdra the Godslayer, wizard general of the Chalcithian armies, had actually intended to overthrow and punish Sraesha for his abandonment and destruction of their people. But even as she was just gathering her supporters, Sraesha and his loyalists were able to capture them all, and from what has been said, without even a drop of blood, was able to get straight to the execution and sentencing of the entire lot of the rebellion. Further, when the coming of Luclin's explosion was detected, Blood was able to get straight to the execution and sentencing of the entire lot of the rebellion. Able to sneak through to Norrath. Further, when the coming a conservatory for themselves, a place known as Srezras, Chamber of Stasis, was buried in the seas near to High Pass Hold, where we now have the Farseas Trading Company established. And the Shisar were able to hide safely in there and predict the colliding of their own temple onto Norrath nearby, so that once Luclin had been destroyed and reassembled, they could use the remnants of the Temple of Sra to travel back to Luclin and reclaim it. So we have, not including the Chalcith stone itself, 3 times that Sraesha flew his snaky finger at fate and came out on top. And that's a troublesome track record.
And up on screen right now is the artist depiction, again from the 10th year EQ anniversary book, of the Chalcith stone, and you can see the different runes and inscriptions on it, and then you can see the different symbols, which are also we've seen in EverQuest and EverQuest 2. This has been recurring imagery in one way or another since basically the inception of the game.
Evil Bunny of Doom. Evil Bunny of Doom.
Evil Bunny of Doom. Damn right. Yes. So that is what I call, and you will probably hear me refer to it. But this symbol right here in the middle is. Oh, pardon.
That symbol.
Is as you just heard them saying.
Go ahead.
It's that time of year where you get all the political calls in the world spamming your phone. Sorry about that. The Evil Bunny of Doom is heavily, heavily present in EverQuest Neriac, and we've never had a really good, solid explanation as to why its iconography is literally everywhere in Neriac.
Well, we talked about this once before off camera. That
I'm looking for some of my pictures right now to show you the same images that can be seen in EverQuest and EverQuest 2.
Yeah, well, we talked about this before off camera, that Inaruk's natural deity icon looks a lot like that, and people thought it might be Keraphim, and other people thought it might be Inaruk.
Well, we do find that a lot of these more ancient symbols occur all over Norath, and in a lot of cases, it's hard to really separate whether this is the societies of Norath picking up older ideas and giving them new life, marks from old influences continuing to resonate, or if it is older ideas and themselves genuinely have a bond to. History being very obscure as it is, these are some of the most arcane symbols with the most mysterious meanings in all of Norath's lore.
So again, this is EverQuest. When they redid the Nectulos, this is the gates to EverQuest. Or, I mean, to Neriak, sorry. And you can see the evil bunny of doom sitting right there. And the question is if it was supposed to be an Auric, and this is the same image, you can see very, very clearly that this image is the exact same thing that is on the Chelsith stone. So what then are the Shisar trying to say about an Auric? Could it relate to the Edal? Could it relate to Mayang Mistmore? I mean, he's got his foot or
He
hand
was he
or
was
something.
interested in the calendar in the Ages End quest early on, I believe.
Oh yeah, he's been in everything. He's always present.
No, he tries to keep his finger on the pulse of the world and watch out for future events. He's been aware of threats that we are only just starting to realize now.
You wonder, because if maybe they understood, because wasn't the Forgotten Realms books really popular when EverQuest 1 was coming out?
Yes, and the writer who writes the Dritz Do'Urden books actually played EverQuest.
Yeah, what, Salvatore was his name?
Yep, R.A. Salvatore.
Yep. I wonder if they put that in there because around the Dark Elf area because they wanted to like make people aware of the Ages in Prophecy because they put it in other places, not just in Riak.
That is true, but it features really, really heavily in the actual imagery all over Neriak and EQ1.
So I just thought maybe they want to do that because what's odd is we don't have that image anywhere in EQOA.
But then it appears in EQ2. Remember when we're doing quests, you see the images all over the floor and everything.
Yeah, it's also on the Mistmore Crested Shield Heritage Quest item.
Cirrus is mentioning in chat how powerful a player is Najina, really, and I think that that's something important to say because she's definitely got some power because we see in this signature quest and the current expansion that she is trying to prepare for the coming Shisar and Akiva as well.
It's hard to put a definitive statement on how powerful Najina is. We do know that she is one of the more intelligent and better read of mages in Norath, and one of the finest of all elemental specialists still alive. It's easier to compare her directly to the player as they're standing in modern times, the average raider, what they should be able to handle. But in reference to the actual lore of the world, the setting and environment, she would be comparable to any of the major powers that currently rule Norath, comparable to Ryle Sathir, Lucandalir, Lendiniara possibly. She is powerful enough on her own that she was able to put a risk of imbalance across the elemental planes. Now that is a startlingly significant thing.
Yeah, we those of you that played through the most Chaos Descending X-Pack, you'll see you battle her a few times. As Gan was saying, if she's got the power to uh, influence planar realms, then that's an immense amount of power compared to normal mortals that roam through Norath. I mean, always been a big player. Even before that, her Tyrdal lore when she was, originally I think a cousin of Kristanos, or maybe her niece, or aunt or something. Um, just the back lore of her making her own laboratory in Lava Storm and fighting off the Thexian soldiers that went to go capture her, or recapture her rather, and then making the deal with McGaff and Nagafin. It's all fascinating stuff.
Yes, she is the Elementalist Ascension instructor. So that is a big deal. But I wouldn't even say Marigold, who's one of them as well. I wouldn't put Marigold on the same category as I would Najina because of the impact that she has had and how she has maintained her lair throughout, thousands of years at this point.
Now, I would actually contest that opinion slightly. Now, the miracle we have now is actually from earlier in his own timeline that's teaching us his etherealist ascension. But we do know that at his pinnacle, Miracle, having become a full lich with a multi-dimensional phylactery, actually was able to construct a weapon capable of threatening the spiritual veil of all of Norrath. It was actually the first time that Norrath's spirits had gathered together to select a mortal champion to represent the survival of the entire world's balance between the living and unliving worlds. This was the Heyoka. And while this has not been replicated by Miracle since, and was a point far after the one we know now, that was still a traumatically powerful event. So I think that they can be measured on the same terms, but I think that we're seeing Najina at her best now, and Miracle's best was from a completely begotten age here.
Some history about her posted directly by Valen was that Najina was a prominent mage of Neriak while she planned and plotted the construction of her soon-to-be sanctuary, a secret and sprawling laboratory she would soon call after herself Najina. She made secret trips out into Lava Storm to create the minions necessary to excavate and construct a subterranean citadel for her clandestine research. This research involved delving deeply into the arcane forces of the elements. She used the guise of research and gathering in the name of the Empire, the Tyrdal Empire, to gain permission from the Empire. While she created guardians for the Dreadguard, she also summoned elementals to construct her lair while she tended to her duties in Neriak. And remember, in Neriak and in the Tyrdal Empire, across all the ages, the mages were anybody who practiced arcane magic that wasn't necromancy were considered the spurned, and they were considered the not the least among the castes, but definitely not nearly as highly as anybody who practiced necromancy or who used divine magic.
Less prestigious schools of thought.
Exactly.
Right,
and we don't know exactly how potent the other two Ascension features are, in my opinion. We know some about them, but their histories aren't as obvious and as readily known. Najina and Miragoul were both two very well fleshed out characters in both EverQuest and in EverQuest 2. And I have no idea. I just pronounce things the way that they come to me, and I don't really care.
Well, we know a little bit more about the thaumaturgy trainer. He is a very correct Chosuth Teriaz of the Sebalusian Empire. Very, very significant figure in Ixar history, but we're not going to dive too far into that. Unfortunately, the Geomancer trainer, one of the Kaydal themselves, or Saydal, depending on pronunciation, that one is, as far as I'm aware, a completely new character or a just absolute mystery.
And I'm in Neriak in EverQuest 1 right now in the Tower of the Spurned, and I'm heading to show some of this iconography that we were talking about. And we're going to go first out to Third Gate itself, to the Sisters 3. And if I start lagging, I apologize. I'm running EverQuest 2, and I'm streaming at the same time. So
On Twitch and Discord.
we may see a little bit of lag.
You're fine so far. You're fine so far. I remember Nagina has a legion of ogres. What are they called? There was a always hidden lore or hidden hints that she had a close relationship with Kristanos, and that's why she was always tipped off early when the Thexians would come to try to retrieve her. Because I guess they didn't really want her. Oh, there it is. There's the one of the original. What's it?
I believe she calls them the Najanar.
I thought they were like they had a division name before that though, like Shadow Ogres or something like that. Before she takes them.
At least that's what they're called in EQ2 in the instances.
What did you say?
Everdark Ogres.
Everdark, that's what I was thinking.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't Everdark one of the subterranean realms of the Narian Kingdom?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I know there is a large area down there, but we've only ever barely touched on any of it. There's a vast world beneath Norrath, and we don't get to see anywhere near enough of it.
Yep, this is the Evil Bunny of Doom symbol, again, which we see as part of the Age's End prophecies, and the Chalceth Stone, and you can see it here, and Neriak with the Tembi and Tombi sisters. This is there's 3. And then if I can find some fire pots, you can see that it's on the actual fire pots as well.
I could read the details on this collectible if no one else is going to, because I don't think the streamers will be able to read it. It's the Everdark Mark of Nishina. It's a quest item for collections for magpies like me. Yes, I have the collection done on my main route, but not on this one. It says, a mark of the Everdark Ogres born in battle as a badge of bravery. The guardians of the long-lost dungeon of Nishina, originally stationed in the now-defunct foreign district of Neriak. The Everdark are completely devoted to the protection of the Dark Elementalist. So I'm guessing the foreign district would translate to EQ2's foreign quarter, but...
Actually, the foreign quarter from Neriak is, I believe, the part that eventually became Fallen Gate in EQ2.
Correct.
Okay,
Raph,
well,
can you type that up and send that to me either in an email or a DM?
what, this collection item?
Yes, please.
You're welcome, I'll do that.
So we have somebody who debates, who disagrees that the Chalceth Stone symbol is the same symbol that you see on or in Neriak.
Yeah.
Which you see this, and you see that, and then it's in the images, and then we have it on.
Let me grab. I'll grab Inoric's symbol from my files and throw it so you can do comparison.
There is some difference. Now, it could be written up to stylistic, but there is definitely a change in shape between the two. You've got the core elements of the triangular head, the 2 ear-like structures and eyes, but then you also see that there is a curvature and a number of additional points on the symbol used in the Chalceth Stone, while the Evil Bunny of Doom has been almost totally consistently hard, solid geometric shapes. So there is room to debate there, definitely.
See, I always assumed it might be more of a meta thing where the developers knew there would be a lot of Dark Elf players in the Dark Elf area, and so they decided to put the symbol out there to make sure it was seen, so it would get the kind of traction in the world that they'd want for storytelling.
You actually see this symbol that the Tempe Tompies, the Sisters 3 have. You see that in a lot of places in EverQuest 1. The most common, probably, that most people would recognize is going to be the Spec Tower in the Oasis, where it was up on the top row of the Spectre Tower. The exact same symbol that is right here. And yes, Fallen Gate is Neriac Foreign Quarter, Cirrus. It is the exact same. We're in Foreign Quarter right now in EverQuest. And if you come this way,
You can even recognize some of the parts of it. Now, the biggest argument that can be made in counter for the Evil Bunny of Doom, that there is a relation between the two symbols, is the fact that when you look at the activated Shissar calendar, it actually directly overlays the two of them. I've got that picture put here if you want to go ahead and show that real quick.
sure, give me just a second to pop back to it. Okay, so here we have, as soon as it opens, okay. I'm asking a lot of people. That's the Enoric symbol, which is very similar, and that's the Enoric symbol that is present in EverQuest 2. It is not in EverQuest 1. In EverQuest 1, he's more heavily identified with other symbology. And let's see, there's again that symbol, and here's the Chelsith stone screen cap coming right now.
So the actual stone has the more curvatured, thorny symbol, while the activated glyphs that appear directly over it has the classic Neriac-style Evil Bunny of Doom, and it directly overlays the two in its activated form. So that could suggest that there is a connection or an intentional relation, though it does help to muddy the waters a bit. But one can see where there is some debate over whether these symbols are intended to be the same or simply expressive of a similar idea.
Right, because they all align perfectly, and let me pull back up the actual art picture from it again, and we can compare them side by side. Give me just 1 second here. So there's the art version, and there's the in-game version in EverQuest 2, and that's the iconography in EverQuest 2. And then again, we see that same iconography multiple times, multiple places, including the Wraith Mountains, now that I think about it, in EverQuest 1.
I know. Oh. I know when the symbols first came out, there was a big discussion regarding the other symbols that surround the big circle, like the combined circle and the Rotanga circles over there on the left. For the Adolian circle, I mean. I call it the Adolian, the blue one.
So there we've got all three of them right next to each other. And let me get back to actually having the chat up so I don't think that we know how Lannis's rise and fall really ties into this. I think that we're going to find out that it's significant, but Lannis is a lot like Furiona, where she rises and falls and rises again repeatedly over and over again.
Interestingly, in a lot of cases, Lannis and Feriona Vi have a habit of being symptomatic of events rather than causing them. A lot of discoveries, a lot of wars, a lot of instances, they're simply so prominent as they get swept up into larger events, they become a part of it.
Cobra, I think that, and one of the things we discussed is that there are different narrative perspectives in game. So one identifier of what something is does not necessarily mean that that is the end all be all. Because, for instance, even in the calendar that we have, we've seen different definitions of the symbols of this calendar over time, and both in EQ1 and in EQ2. I absolutely accept the idea that she was Dressalist or Dressalict, and I would expect her to come back just because she's come back over and over and over again for a variety of things.
No comment.
They can't keep their darn hands off her.
She's one of the predominant iconic characters of the game, just as much as Firiona is. So, and again, she has been killed and resurrected so many times, it's not even funny.
Does anyone else? Never mind.
No, you don't get to start and stop like that.
No, it's bad puns and bad puns. That's all I want to say.
That's okay. It's acceptable for you to be punny.
But I'm glad you guys are running around. Are you in the foreign quarter in EQ1 now? Running around?
I am heading back. I've got to remember, it's been forever since I really walked around here.
Yeah, guys. Also, like Lucrit, and I know he's in EQ2. He's either his ghost or he survived. He's in EQ2 in Fallen Gate.
Yeah, because Fallen Gate is foreign quarter. They are the exact same locations. Yeah, this is where I am.
Heard someone mention old Firiona.
And this symbol right here is the symbol in EverQuest 2 that was most heavily associated. Anoric.
We have her action figure from, I don't know when this came out, but...
Oh, no way. You got the action figure for her, Lannis?
Yeah! Not Lannis.
Oh.
We've got Firiona somewhere. Yeah, I've got Firiona somewhere.
I've also got, you can see in the background, my poster of Anashti. I have another random thing, but it's old EverQuest. Sorry for ducking, I don't really want to be seen right now, I look disgusting.
I don't think we know how to... I don't think you're on camera, Raph.
Oh, I had my camera on for a minute to show off my Firiona figure.
Oh, okay.
I'll show her again to you later.
Sirius, I think it's important to remember that Lannis is a goddess. A demigoddess, sure, but a goddess in EverQuest. So her avatar is destroyed over and over again. That does not mean that her essence hasn't survived. Because remember, she survived in a sword for a long time. She was in the sword that was the Shadow Knight's epic quest in EQ2.
What was the name of that? It was,
Is that some editry I see of...
Sword of the Blood Moon, maybe? Or I could be misremembering. Sedition.
Sedition.
That was it. Yes, because she's always been about betrayal. She's always coveted her father's power. There was EverQuest, when it came out, they had an acting troupe, and the acting troupe used to do live events. I mean, you also had the guides who would do guide events and stuff that we're kind of more familiar with in EQ2, but in EQ1, they had an official acting troupe that played major characters in Norrath's lore, and they would go and do different events, and the events would change the world. And this is where we see the actual rise of her cult Primordial Malice that we see in EQ2, was Lannis was trying to reassemble a staff called Malevolence, and she was trying to assemble the staff in order to take over her father's plane, which, oh, look, she tried to do the same thing in EQ2 again, and she got smacked down through a bunch of different events. You had to kill a dragon, and you were either on her side or you were against her side. And it was this big, major, multi-week acting event, and once it happened, we killed Lannis, and a player got her on each server, got her staff, got Malevolence, and in addition to that, the Wraith Mountains changed, and you had the Cult of Primordial Malice established there, and Primordial Malice was added to the faction lists, and you could raise or lower your faction by killing different NPCs. And the Cult of Primordial Malice was directly against a lot of the Neriac factions. And then, of course, you see the Cult of Primordial Malice in EQ2, where they actually succeed, and they're in areas that were the Wraith Mountains, and they resurrect her.
Hey, there's the eye. The eye that's in EQ2 at the Connects Falls. Cobra Commander does say something. He says the sword and the stone with the Blood Moon gem in Sedition is also the cause of the curse in the Kithakor. See, I wasn't really knowledgeable of the Kithakor curse from EQ1 when they changed it from that event. It's good to know, though.
Yeah, that was one of the first times where Lannis almost died, and then Anoric says, "No, you're coming with me." And then he takes her back to the Plane of Hate, and he tortures her for a while, and then she dies when we stop her from taking over her father's plane, and then she comes back again in the Dragons of Norrath quest. I think it was Dragons of Norrath. Do you remember, Gan?
I know that she was involved in that, but I sort of missed a lot of that content. I know that she was lost again, turns up again. I know that she came back another time when time itself was being corrupted in the void, and Lindane Yara actually slipped over there. She is just one of those figures that no one can leave laying.
It's like Vinicor.
It's exactly why I don't think that she's gone now. This is one of the things, too, I liked about old EverQuest.
Did we ever finally kill Vinicor in EQ2?
We fought his soul last time.
Oh, okay.
The different hidden secret passageways of Neriac. And of course our priest of Discord. But we all like to pretend that Discord didn't exist. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
We'll make our own video for why Discord isn't in EQ2 as prominently as it was in EQ1. Oh, that's a good idea for another stream too. Another one would be like comparisons, beta lore versus live lore.
So, returning back, we will have the Shissar, and the Shissar look to be our major issue in Luclin. In EQ2, they look to be, and it looks to be our dear old friend that we saw in EverQuest, Emperor Sra. And he looks to have, and we already know this, so no spoilers. If you have done Altar of Malice, you know that Akevans are serving him, so he is somehow taken over that role. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that we see repetitively that Emperor Sra wants to become a god, and we have also seen in EverQuest and EverQuest 2 that mortals or powerful, what I guess we would consider more player races, have the ability to become deities and to take over deity spots and take over deity positions. And we see that with Bertox, we see that with Anashti, we see that with Rodzek Knife, and we see that with Drizzle Row, just to name a few that we know for.
Now, there is an alternate character interpretation that one can apply to Emperor Threshza and to the Shisar in general that becomes relevant here. When the first gods came to Norrath and created the races that formed the first empires, they did so with basic ideas in mind, and that's what made a lot of the elder races some of the more powerful in essence. And when Kazakh Thul specifically created his firstborn children, the Shisar, the concept he had in mind, the central calling of the species was survival. Fear is a powerful tool for evolution, growth, and survival, and the Shisar were programmed on a fundamental level to seek to outlast, outlive, outthink, and outdominate anything that would threaten that survival. Sraeshza, after being corrupted by certain influences, did come to the idea that the greatest survival is absolute dominion. If you become powerful enough that you can suppress the gods, if you become so absolute a fact of reality that reality itself can no longer destroy you, then you have succeeded in survival. You are unchallenged in that regard. So, in a sense, Sraeshza has gambled the lives, souls, and existence of his entire species against an absolute survival.
And here, I'm in still in EverQuest, and you can see that the symbol of an orc. This is the Cleric Guild. In EverQuest 1, the symbol of an orc was really the skull with the tongue and the wings.
Ooh, can you go inside and see if the big statue is still there? Now,
You mean
this
the
might
one
be...
that was in EQ2?
Yeah. Because
It
it's
is
in...
not. We do have this lovely picture of him, though. See?
Yeah, so we had that symbol in EQOA. Now in EQOA, we did have the big statue that's in EQ2.
And again, it's also interesting. I was mentioning that the symbol of Eridan is on the fire pots in the Cleric Guild.
Huh.
And you see that.
Well, I know
And
there
then you
was...
see the evil bunny of doom again on their little judgment.
Wasn't there some old... I don't know if it was beta lore or early lore where the Erudites came to Neriak to learn necromancy?
I am not sure, but I know that there are erudites in Neriak right now. In the
From
Foreign Quarter.
what I understand, it was actually Neriak connecting with the early erudites that created the heretic movement. And that's why initially the heretics were actually Inaru worshippers. It was only after the war started to go on and Neriak's support for Peniel faded that the heretics actually turned to Thulian worship instead.
Now, we haven't talked much, and I don't know if there's much up in the expansion about the coterie, which we haven't mentioned them that much today.
We also haven't really talked about Sharval and the Bashir very much as well. And I know that at least part of that area sticks around.
The coterie actually do not get much of a mention in the new expansion. There's a couple items that reference being made for killing coterie, but we do not see any of them individually. We do not hear anything about them or their current status. Most likely that is something that would come up more if we do get to see the rest of the globe or get out towards Cata Castellum, where they have set up their central bastion of power previously. Castle Zephyr was just in the Tenebrous Mountains, near to Cata Castellum itself. Sharval we also have not heard much about. At this time, we don't know the current status. We know that in EverQuest 1, they were in a state of open warfare from Grimling invasions. And now that we know that the Akivans and Shisar are commanding the Grimling forces, which appear to be highly populous, it's likely not boding a good status for Sharval now.
Also, Mayong in EverQuest 1 did actually attempt to become a god. He attempted to take Ione Rose plane and turn the plane of music into the plane in EverQuest 2, he seems to have taken more of a backseat. The difference, I would say, is that once you become a deity in EverQuest's world, there is a sort of kind of consensual reality. And the idea is that if you become a deity of something, you are influenced as well by mortals' beliefs of you. So
Yeah.
it's power, but it's cursed power, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like in EQ1 he becomes it and then he has to get it, he gets raided and like defeated, and he wants to be because he wants to disconnect from the old plane of music, which he turned into the plane of blood. Was he renamed it as?
Not quite, actually. Actually, he had used a manipulated civil war between the vampires to build up the fear in Norathians, which he then converted into faith by revealing his place behind it. He created a demi-plane around an underground fortress called Dreadspire. That became the demi-plane of blood. He then was able to invade the plane of music to gather more divine power to himself, being a still natal god at that point. Now, he did eventually lose his godhood. That occurred while he was attempting to destroy Solusek Rho in the heart of his power, the interior of our sun, a space known as Soltaris. Now, he referenced being mortal again as he fell to ashes in that battle, and there are hints in his dialogue in EQ2 that suggest this could have in some form happened in our timeline, or that he is aware of it happening in the other timeline. Mayon Mistborn EQ2 does make reference to having been a god or having godly knowledge, but he leaves it very ambiguous, so there is some question how much the two timelines may connect.
It's also interesting to note that EverQuest 2 has a tendency, as we see with the Edal, to put lore and information about what's coming in its collection quests. And you go to an amphitheater in the plane of magic, and you get a lot of information about Ione. So there's some hints that we may start seeing some of that. One of the things that we have talked about off camera that has been really happening is as Daybreak cuts, you've seen the sharing of resources with EverQuest and EverQuest 2 a lot more. And there's a heavy mirroring of those timelines and paths. So what happens in one tends to happen in some version or form. And so if you know release EverQuest, for instance, fourth gate. So EverQuest EQ Nariak had foreign quarter, first gate, second gate, third gate, basically. And now you have fourth gate. And fourth gate is what actually you have in EQ2. Nariak and EQ2 is fourth gate. Like where the queen is in the castle, that's fourth gate.
Dark
And
Light
that
Palace.
actually exists in Nariak, in EverQuest 1 now. And it's the exact, by the way, it's the exact same structures that you see in EQ2. The modeling is very similar. You see the same dark lights. It's that same very Asian influence, and it's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I think EQ1 has a Nashti now. They've had it for some years now.
Yes, they have. They got an Ashti as well.
She got her own feature expansion, Broken Mirror.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
And again, I'm in Nariak Foreign Quarter right now, and you can see here's my, again, Do or Die Nariak, Do or Die Dark Elves. It is the most racially diverse city on Norrath that is accepting, right? Because yeah, you have Freeport, but people have to live in the sewers or underground in Freeport. But here
Well,
we're in the foreign. Nope, in the Foreign Quarter, you're seeing halflings, you're seeing humans. You come down here. This is a Halasian crate right there. You can go up here.
there's one exception, but personally I hate it, and it is a post-timeline split. There is one city in Norrath that is more metropolitan than Nariak, and that's Crescent Reach, and I think Crescent Reach is a terrible idea. I despise it utterly.
That's the
The Draken
Draken.
City.
Draken, yeah.
All
Oh.
player races automatically start there unless you are a paid player and can resume one of the original cities. And I cannot imagine any reason for Ixars to be starting in a dragon-ruled city.
Oh, and then now we see why.
I would consider that not. I'm talking more NPCs, not where players start so much as NPCs, and there aren't a lot of.
They
different.
do have NPCs from, I believe, all the playable races there.
It's been a while
Well-
since I've been to Crescent Reach, but it was also cut off from everything. So I have my story and I'm sticking to it. Borwin is EQ. Cobra. I don't think it exists in EverQuest. Well, I know that they
It's
started
being
expanding.
retconned to it.
Yeah, that's what I. Yeah, I remember they started to do a lot of
We let them know when I'm
things
taking off.
going on in EverQuest 1. I just don't remember as offhand.
Because
since
we're
I haven't
live
paid as
on
much attention.
Twitch.
All right, I'm gonna flip back to EQ2 now. So, does anybody have any questions about Luclin or anything about Luclin specifically that we haven't included?
Gotta let you guys know, I gotta get wrapping up and get rolling. I forgot I had dinner plans with a friend. So, I'll just, I'll end my version of the recording, but please continue.
It has been an absolute pleasure, Rezikai.
Thank you, fellas. Thank you,
It
MD.
absolutely has. There's some Shisar from EQ1, and I think I'm just going to do a real quick